Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated over-the-board chess player, and in this series we're going from 1000 to 2000 Elo in chess.com rapid games, where I'll be explaining my thought process as best as I possibly can for your education and entertainment. And today we have a Caro Kann Defense against Flemming Matt from Denmark, who is 1960 rated, so by far our hardest opponent of the series so far. And we're going to go for the advanced, well, my opponent chooses the advanced variation, and we're going to choose the c5 line. My opponent goes c3. Now, we're going to play knight to c6, applying more pressure to d4. And the most common move in this position is knight to f3, which, believe it or not, is a mistake. And I've got so many videos, not only in the speedrun, which will be linked below, like the previous episodes of the speedrun, but also in my Caro Kann playlist, which will also be linked below. This is so unbelievably common, but the problem is it looks so natural, and I'm going to show you, hopefully, how to take full advantage of it. And even if my opponent plays this in a different way, with like bishop to b5, for example, we still should get a very comfortable position, and I will be giving you a very interesting weapon against bishop to b5, which I'm currently working on in my Caro Kann opening course, but my opponent goes bishop to d3, which is an interesting idea, except it just loses a pawn. Now, it's not like we're up a full pawn for nothing. My opponent can get some relatively decent counterplay in exchange for that pawn. We also have to be careful, just because this diagonal's a little bit weak. But there's no bishop to b5 check, because of course we just take that. So ideally, we'll probably just drop our knight back to c6. We may have to leave our dark squared bishop blocked in, unless my opponent goes knight to f3 and allows bishop to g4 before we play e6. And then we should just have a pretty normal Caro Kann game, except we've already won the d4 pawn. I mean, being up a pawn on move 6 is not bad, and I get the feeling, based on the amount of time my opponent is now spending, that he didn't really think this through. You also can't play queen to a4 check, which looks like it picks up the knight, because we just go knight to c6 and we block. My opponent goes knight to c3. Oh, this actually does ring a bell. I'm pretty sure we've had this in a previous episode, and I believe we have to play e6 before we retreat our knight. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we have to leave our bishop blocked in, and make sure that the d5 pawn is well defended, because it could come under fire with like the queen potentially opening up, the knight obviously putting pressure. And yes, we have to concede the fact that our bishop is going to be locked inside of the pawn chain now, which isn't what we want necessarily, but we're up a whole pawn, so it shouldn't really be a problem. We now just need to regroup. My opponent goes queen to g4, which of course attacks our knight. There's no knight c2 because the bishop defends that, and we also can't play the very natural bishop to c5 guarding the knight because of queen to g7. I assume what my opponent is going to try to argue is that for the cost of one pawn, it's very difficult for me to develop my king side because my bishop can't really get out very well. And he also has quick development, which is reasonable. I play a lot of opening gambits with like similar sort of arguments. Now, I believe we can try knight e7, knight g6 to try and block things up and cut off the g file so we can get our bishop out in castle. However, part of me thinks that maybe going for a fianchetto is more accurate to apply more pressure to the e5 pawn. I'm not entirely sure. If g6, do we have to be concerned about h4? I mean, we can go h5. Queen to g3 is very likely, threatening bishop g6, pawn g6, and queen to g6. So if here, we need to do something about my opponent sacrificing on the g6 square. So we probably have to go knight to e7, and if bishop to g5... we probably just go bishop g7, and the queen is defending the e-pawn, sure. But that should be okay. My opponent can castle kingside. That's interesting. I want to spend a minute really thinking about this position because it's important to try and get this right. The move f6 can be considered, but queen to h5 is a problem because after g6, bishop takes pawn takes, the queen can take the rook. We can, however, consider the move f5, which is a very common idea in these sorts of structures. I play these kinds of structures with the white pieces, so I know what the ideas are for black. The difference is queen to h5, g6, the bishop is of course blocked off. So if my opponent takes en passant, then we can take with a knight, with a tempo on the queen, also covering the h5 square. The queen would, let's say, go to g3. And maybe we can play bishop to d6, castle kingside, try to develop normally. There's a lot of pressure on our position in that particular scenario, although bishop d6 would come with tempo on the queen. f5 might be the right option, but also g6 looks very solid. Actually, no, I don't like f5. Because if f5, white can just retreat, and we stop his plans for the time being. But how are we planning to develop our pieces? If we want to go g6, bishop to g7, then again h4, h5 is a problem. And if we go h5, then the g6 pawn hangs because our f pawn is no longer defending it. So I don't like that idea. We could try to ignore white's threats and create some of our own, but I don't think that's in the spirit of the position. I think we need to try and defend this position. So I'm leaning more and more towards the move g6. G6, bishop to g5. We do have h5 there, counter-attacking, but I don't think that really gets us anywhere. We could play queen to b6, counter-attacking b2. I don't love leaving the king side, though. We may have to just settle for knight to e7. Well, knight g to e7. Bishop e7. Well, maybe we can go bishop to e7. I mean, I don't really want to trade off my dark-squared bishop, but that's probably not the end of the world. I'm going to go g6. I don't know if this is the correct approach, but f4 didn't feel right. Knight to e7, knight to g6 didn't feel right, because again, h4, h5 is problematic. I think that this is the best way for... Oh my god. I think this is the best way for us to try and eliminate as many threats from the white side as possible. And we don't even have to go bishop to g7. I would love to go bishop g7 and apply pressure to e5 and try and win that pawn in the long run. Because obviously there's no d-pawn to defend it and the f-pawn is blocked by the knight. Yeah, this is what I was expecting here. If h5, there's no bishop g6 because the queen hangs. That was what I was calculating before. I suppose the only thing I need to be concerned about is h5. If queen g3, then just knight e7 and we should be okay. Of course, defending g6 and maybe even trying to play knight to f5 to block things up. The only thing I'm thinking is h5, queen to h3, preparing the move g4. That looks a little bit more scary. Now, maybe we can go knight to h6 in that line, controlling there. Of course, a bishop trade should benefit us. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. An awful lot of sense. So let's play it, h5. And this does look very risky. I mean, pushing... I mean, not the f-pawn, but pushing like pawns like this in a position where we don't really have any development is definitely risky. But I think it makes a lot of sense, and I think it should be okay. Knight e7, bishop g5... I suppose if the bishop takes, we can always take with the knight, which maintains control of g6. So that's fine. Let's play it. Knight g to e7. And there's a very good chance we don't actually castle kingside. There is a very good chance that we may play moves like bishop d7, queen to b6, and actually castle queenside, and then try to counterattack white in the center or on the king side, and try to claim that he's overextended with a couple of his pawns. That is a very real thing that could happen. Okay, bishop to g5. I like the look of queen to b6, just unpinning and developing. Queen c7 would be nice, except knight to b5 is a problem. Knight b5 actually is a problem here, because it's not clear how we defend the d6 square, so maybe I have to play a6, which looks ugly. Well, no, not ugly, but it looks like a waste of time, right? It's a very slow move, but does white have a threat? I don't think so. I don't think white has any threats here. His next move is probably just castling. So a6 makes a lot of sense. We could consider queen to a5 pinning the knight to make sure the knight can't infiltrate. But after castles, the threat of knight to b5 is renewed. And why is my queen on a5? It's not really doing anything. So I'm going to play a6. I don't know if this is the correct move. It just looks like it makes a lot of sense to me. I suppose we also stop ideas of b4, b5 in the future, maybe, to try and boot my knight around, which may or may not happen. But I believe I have extinguished white's attacking ideas now. There are no h-pawn pushes. There's no sacrifices on the g6 square. And we can probably just go bishop g7 and develop, right? Just apply pressure to e5. Now we're preparing moves like queen to c7, and I mean, white can defend, yeah, but then we get a more normal game, and that's exactly what we want, because we are up a pawn. A pawn is sometimes inconsequential, but if we can try to eliminate white's attacking threats, then it will become consequential. Because we could get to a favourable endgame, for example, where being up a pawn could just mean the difference between a draw and a win. Queen c7 does look nice. It does look like it somewhat exposes my queen, so maybe we should start with bishop to d7, just developing the bishop. Maybe the queen belongs on b6. Not really too sure. I mean, queen c7 doesn't actually threaten to win the pawn. But we do unpin the knight, and we have ideas of knight to f5 potentially, trying to harass the queen. Is this a cause for concern? Bishop d7, knight to a4, trying to get into c5? I suppose c5 is weak. Do we just castle kingside? I don't think white has any threats. It looks scary, though. Difficult to say. Difficult to say. Knight b4 is tempting. Going after this very strong bishop. Although I assume the bishop will just drop back to b1. And why is our knight on b4? It serves no function there. I don't know what our long-term plans are here, to be honest. I'm struggling to come up with them. I'm thinking maybe just bishop d7 and we castle kingside at a good moment. Bishop d7 is useful because it leaves the option open for bishop to e8, which would support this pawn chain. That's one of the reasons I like bishop d7 first. And I think I'm going to play it. Do we have to be concerned about this? No, we just take it. That's fine. Cool. Just be aware of sacrifices, just in case. But I think bishop d7. And we can throw in queen a5 or queen b6 or queen c7. We even give ourselves the option of queen b8 by moving the bishop, which looks a bit silly, but it applies pressure to e5 whilst not being in the firing line of a rook on the c-file. So that wouldn't be completely ridiculous. We could even go rook c8, queen c7, queen b8, if needs be. No pun intended. Meaning that our rook wouldn't be locked out the game. Because of course queen b8 immediately would lock the rook out the game, right? So if we can maneuver like this, then the rook still serves a good purpose. Okay, rook there. Do we need to stop knight to a4? Is this a big problem? Should we just throw in queen to a5 to prevent that? We could go b5, but then a4, and it looks like we're overextending because we're not castled yet. So queen a5 does look nice. I mean, bishop d2 isn't isn't very scary. I assume we just drop our queen somewhere. Yeah, where do we put it, actually? Where do we put it? I'm not sure. Okay, no, maybe not queen to a5. If rook c8, knight a4... there's no good way to defend c5. Of course, if we move this knight, his knight will be under attack. If... Oh, come on. Computer, please don't freeze on me. Okay, if rook c8, knight a4, knight e5, with a discovered attack on the knight, if knight takes and we take the knight, we're up a pawn. But to be honest, I don't like all the pressure. And white doesn't even have to do that anyway. b5, again, does kind of eliminate the problem of knight to a4. But it feels like an overreach. If a4... I suppose b4 knight to e2... We're fine. It just feels like too much. I'm going to play rook c8. Again, I'm still delaying castling because I'm not sure exactly what I want to do on the king side. I suppose one of the problems of moving my knight in this kind of a line would mean that after something like take, I can't take back with the knight there. And then there may be sacrifices on g6. But to be honest, with the inclusion of queen to f7, I don't think we have anything to be concerned about. I think that's fine. Just worth noting. Okay, a3 is a bit slow. That's what we love to see. That's what we love to see. White is letting the initiative slip a little bit. I feel like now maybe we just castle. Right, let's just get castled. We're not blundering anything. We've made all the necessary preparations. We have literally developed, well, not our queen, but basically all of our other pieces first. Then we are completely safe and castled, and we're up a pawn. We're up a pawn. I would love to play the move knight to f5 at an opportune moment, but it feels a little bit too... I mean, obviously, in this particular scenario, even if the queen wasn't hanging, we would have problems with the d5 pawn, and taking with the g pawn would blunder ideas like, you know, bishop to h6, for example. So we do have to be quite careful with how we break out of this position, but we are essentially priming ourselves to break out of the position by making sure that everything is defended. Everything is defended here. We've built up literally all of our pawns on the light squares, which is very typical of the Caro Kann. And we're up a pawn. We're up a pawn. We've consolidated the position. We've gotten our material advantage and maintained our material advantage. We have countered white's attacking ideas and tried to freeze up his attack, I suppose. And now we need to start instigating moves like queen to b6, maybe. Even b5 now that we're castled makes a bit more sense to take some space. Maybe on the last move it even made sense, but I kind of just wanted to get castled first. This pin is very, very annoying. I fully admit that's very annoying, but there's not really much we can do about it right now, and it's not the end of the world. Not the end of the world, because this bishop is also blocking the queen's access to g6, which is where white was trying to build up a lot of pressure, right? It's not obvious what this knight is doing on f3 either, other than just defending, which is obviously good for us. I will hopefully be able to start to exploit the fact that a lot of his pieces seem to have lost their purpose. As in, like, this knight is pretty much stifled by my pawns, unless he tries to get in on the dark squares, which I think would be a good idea. I mean, if knight to a4, again, there is a good chance we have tactics with knight takes e5. And the point is, if the knight moves, we can take on f3 with check, which is really useful. And if, knight to a5, knight to a4, knight to e5, take. In those positions, we may have to be careful about our queen getting overloaded. That's something to be aware of. But it could work in some scenarios, is what I'm saying. Also, this bishop would be hanging with a fork, which is a very useful detail to note. I probably should have noticed that beforehand. We may want to consider the move rook to e8 as well. Okay, bishop f6 is interesting. Okay, taking makes no sense. Right, taking makes no sense. We are just helping white. He's also still not really threatening to take on g6 because we have ample defense. We could consider the move king to h7, but then just knight g5 and we get kicked away. So that's a good move. That's a good move, and we need to try and defend ourselves. How are we going to do that? Good question. Very good question. I assume we just ignore the threat, but knight to g5 does look very scary. We could just play a move like b5, taking some space, maybe trying to go b4, maybe trying to rotate our knight into the game somehow, and ignore white. I do also like the prospect of bishop to e8, which not only frees up d7 for my queen, which could be a useful square, but also ensures that g6 has more defense. So something like bishop e8, knight g5, queen d7, we are defending the light squares really, really well there. I like bishop to e8. I think that makes the most sense. I'm going to play it. I would love to avoid a bishop trade because of how many pawns we have on light squares. Our dark squared bishop is a very valuable piece, not least because the e-pawn is weak and our bishop was targeting it. But we need to be pragmatic in this situation because, white has decent compensation for being down only one pawn. I'm not 100% sure if I've navigated the opening perfectly because it is the early bishop to d3 idea on move 5. I know I've lost to before, which is part of the reason I've been very careful this game. I mean, we'll see in the computer analysis whether the computer had anything more sinister up its sleeve. Queen to g5. That is not what I was expecting. I don't think it's an amazing move either. My knight's well defended. I can probably just go queen to d7. Unpinning. Maybe? I mean, I suppose the point is he has more pressure on the knight, sure. But... oh, is he trying to go g4? Oh, he might be trying to go g4. That would make a lot of sense. That would make a lot of sense. Interesting. Interesting. I mean, we're very cramped here. I don't like it. I really don't. Queen d7, I'm a little bit concerned about knight to a4 there. So we may have to go b5. Taking looks suicidal, right? Like, we can't take. King h7 again, just g4 is scary. b5, g4, take h5. I think we're okay. I mean, I'm not confident. Don't get me wrong, I'm not confident. But I think that after we manage to play the move queen to d7, we might be able to survive this. This is a really sophisticated attack from my opponent, so fair play to him. This is very impressive. But b4, no, that can't be the idea. Unless this is what he wants, and my knight can't take because my other knight hangs. Maybe? Queen d7, a4. Well, then I can take. And if take, then I'll just take. So that's fine. I hate the fact my bishop literally can't move. That is so ugly. There may even be some justification for sacrificing the knight on b5. But I think if here, I probably just go queen to b7. Does that work? Yeah. Because my queen just keeps an eye on everything, attacks the bishop, and we're very well defended there. So that's okay. It'll be really interesting to see in the post-game analysis the ideas the computer comes up with for white to attack me and also for me to defend myself, because I have a feeling I probably could have played this in a less passive manner. There was probably a more confrontational way I could have gone about this that the computer might have preferred. We do also open ourselves up to the opportunity of playing knight to e5 now, which could be quite useful. And after takes, the d-pawn is defended. The only thing I'd be concerned about is e6, supported by the rook, and after takes... Oh, he can't take on g6 because of my bishop, actually. So my bishop comes to the rescue there, which I suppose justifies it being on the e8 square, as strange as it looks. And I mean, if knight f5, if my opponent doesn't take it, then, you know, knight to h6 threatens to win the queen, and the queen would be stuck there because the knight would cover the g3 square, and this would be covered by the pawn. We've actually had a similar kind of queen trap in a recent episode of the speedrun as well, with a very similar pawn structure on the king side. So that wouldn't be completely unreasonable. That could happen. So that's also a possibility. And if we trade off this light squared bishop, then we make our lives a lot easier. g4 certainly feels like it should be played. It really does feel like it should be played. Because what else is white doing if not g4? I mean, there's nothing if not g4, because my pawns are very solid, right? He needs to try and break them apart with g4 and h5. If g4, we have to take it. We have no choice. Otherwise, we're going to lose the h5 pawn, and white will invade on h7 with the queen, and the game will be over. So if g4, we probably have to take and play knight to f5. I think that's probably forced to try and break out of our shell a little bit. Don't get me wrong, I don't love it. But we probably don't have much of a choice. If g4 takes into h5 immediately, that might be even more clinical. Because, knight to e2 can't be right. I mean, I understand this, but you've got to go pawn g4, surely. Knight f5 makes a lot of sense now, I think. Knight f5, bishop takes, pawn takes, knight f4, targeting this, but more importantly, e6. It's a bit scary, actually, because pawn e6 is a problem. Pawn e6... Hard to say. This bishop is so annoying. Because, I mean, white has to take it, otherwise bishop h6 happens, right? So bishop takes, I have to take with this pawn, knight to f4. What can I do there? Don't know. I don't know. My bishop is so bad. I also don't see what else we do, though. I literally don't know what else we can do. We have to do something. And there is a chance as well that white blunders his queen. That could happen. That could happen. He may not recognize the threat of bishop to h6, also the fact that the g3 square is covered. However, I think the likelihood is that he's going to take. But hopefully we give ourselves the best chance of fighting back by going for this trade. Maybe we can take this bishop and try and win the pawn. Big maybe. Big maybe. Not thrilled. Not thrilled. But okay. We fight. And if we can just survive, we will be up a pawn. Even if our d-pawn falls, because of course it will become an isolated pawn, even if our d-pawn falls, it will be equal material, because we're up a pawn. And yes, my opponent does go for this line, which is the one I was concerned about. So, you know, don't love that. Don't love that. Is this a move? No. No, it's not. Doesn't work at all. E6 is a little bit scary. By a little bit, I mean a lot. Do we go knight to d8? No, that just blunders a piece. Take. God, our bishop is terrible. Maybe king h7? I'm going to play it. I'm going to play it. I'm trying to defend this. Okay, yeah, my opponent takes. Oh, yeah, that knight h5. Completely missed that. And my opponent wins the pawn back. And, yep, not good. Oh. Yeah, well, that's game over. That's game over. Where on earth did we go wrong? I have no idea. Literally no idea. That sucks. I mean, great attack from my opponent, but I'm not sure what we should have done. Maybe g6 was the wrong idea in the opening, but let's have a look in the analysis. Okay, so we of course open with the advanced variation. We have c5, c3, knight c6. Most people here play knight to f3, and black can get a very easy game. Which again, we've had this many times in the speedrun. You can check the previous episodes if you want to have a look. But I'm sure this is the correct line. And it's equal. I know that it's pretty much equal, right? But black has to go for it, really. Knight here, e6 is the correct move, okay. Queen out. Okay, well, the suggestions here are just mental. I mean, the computer likes queen b6, defending the knight. Who's playing this ever? That's such a strange move. I mean, this looks scary, but the computer doesn't think so. I would be very scared to play this. Very, very scared. And the other move is knight to f5. Which, I suppose it makes sense, because we go bishop to e6, maybe bishop b4 and knight to e7, and our position is solid. But to ruin your pawn structure like that is very counterintuitive. I went for knight to c6, which is not amazing, but okay. Knight to f3. d4 was the best move. Really? a6. Yeah, I mean, if the knight jumps in, then we just take and try and survive, right? That makes a lot of sense. Although, if e6, we're probably going to have to go king f8. Knight d4. Crazy lines. But knight to f3, we go g6, which is not the right idea. h4, h5, queen g3. We're okay here. Knight g to e7 is lose. That's a mistake? Really? The computer wants a6, which, I mean, I played later, but in this position is baffling. Knight b4, which is also baffling, because I don't understand what our plan is now. The knight looks ridiculous. What else? Knight to h6, which makes sense. Are we really trying to go knight here? Let's say white castles, for example. No, not. Oh, knight g4. Just blocking off the g file. Yeah, that does make sense. I went knight g to e7. Not good. a6, too slow. Castles, bishop g7, rook e1. We're just at a significant disadvantage. And I'm trying to defend myself, but the computer likes queen b8 here, which is hilarious. But I go rook c8, a3. How did my opponent find a3? What? That makes no sense. Why is that the best move? I mean, it stops knight b4, but who cares? The bishop can still go to b1. Why on earth is a3 the best move? I have no idea. No idea. What happens if white passes the move? What's the point? So a3 is played to prevent knight b4, bishop b1, rook c4 looking at rook g4. Okay then. Sure. Sure. I mean, there's no way my opponent saw that. Unless that's like a common theme. Maybe he just really didn't want to allow knight b4. I have no idea. Okay, whatever. a3. A castle? I mean, maybe he just played a3 to prepare b4. Bishop f6. Yeah, I kind of just missed this move, to be honest. I went bishop to e8, and that's way too passive. Rook e8 is the move, but that's so counterintuitive to move your rook away from the defense of the king. But realistically, I can't do a whole lot. I can just try and curl up in a ball. So queen g5, I go b5. And here, I thought that g4 made so much sense. Apparently not. Apparently, b4 and knight to e2 are the best ideas. I mean, am I really threatening b5? Let's say white passes the move. I mean, sorry, am I threatening b4? I don't think so. You can take. I can't take back because my knight hangs. So I wasn't planning on that anyway. The computer's best move for black here is rook c7. Giving away this pawn. Like, what? I'm not trying to go b4. But okay, b4 is played by my opponent, sure. I go queen to d7, which, I mean, I'm just trying to survive. Knight e2 is the best move. Knight f5 was kind of just a last-ditch attempt to try and trick my opponent. That was basically all it was. Of course, taking is the best move, though, and then knight to f4. It's funny that I actually mentioned the move knight to e5, and that's the computer's favorite move, so that's pretty funny. But I went king to h7, just trying to break out of the position somehow. You know, if white wastes a move, then I get this, and I can fight. But my opponent takes on g7, which is the best move, and gets knight takes h5, which, to be honest, I just completely missed. And I'm completely lost, because if I go here, then I just get mated. So I have to control the h6 square, and then, yeah, knight to f6 just wins my queen. Well played from my opponent. That was a good attack. That's a very tricky opening that he played with bishop to d3. And, I mean, pretty well done on not having to spend that much time either. I mean, he used his time quite well, to be fair. Here, I mean, knight to e2 did make a lot of sense. He spent a while on that. He spent a while on bishop to f6, which... yeah, I suppose. It's definitely the best move, because I I can't afford to trade here. Not least because this is a problem, but because opening the e-file is an issue for me. Knight to d5 is an issue. I can't let that happen. So, yeah, my opponent ends the game with 95% accuracy. Very impressive. We kind of just got crushed there. Kind of just got crushed. So, if you want an interesting system against the Caro Kann, then I guess Bishop d3 is one of those systems. Like I say, I've lost to it before because it's very dangerous, but that's rough. That's rough. If you want to see a Caro Kann game that goes slightly better than this one, then check out the video up here. And if you want to see the previous episodes of the speedrun, check out the playlist down there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those videos.